welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. This is Yadi Caro. In each episode, we'll learn about a different soft skill and lessons on how to apply them. Soft skills are the non-technical skills that actually make hard skills work. So if you are in a highly technical field who wants to get that project going, or if you are getting ready to advance in your career, this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining me in this learning venture. This is a special podcast episode because we will be able to address two key topics, communications and COVID. First, since communications is such a broad skill, I will be focusing on different aspects of communications throughout upcoming episodes. Today, we focus on the skill of asking questions. Having the skill allows us to understand and be understood. So, knowing different ways to approach people and ask questions from customers, teammates, and potential clients is essential. So, what does this have to do with COVID? Well, my guest today, Alsy Acevedo, is a former journalist who until recently was a senior media specialist at John Hopkins Medicine International. As you may know, John Hopkins has become the source to track information related to the coronavirus. Alsy's journalistic skill of asking questions allowed her to be able to translate essential information from medical experts and keep the community informed. In today's episode, Alsy discusses her experience as a journalist, describes key lessons for finding sources and asking questions, and then we take an insider's look at how communications occurred within Johns Hopkins since the early stages of the pandemic. Today, Alsy is the Director of Communications at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Let's listen. Thank you, Alsy, for joining us today at the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about what is it your day-to-day? What does it mean to be a corporate communications professional for the healthcare industry?
So I am still discovering that world. I started my corporate communications job a couple of weeks ago, but I come to this position from working at Johns Hopkins for 5 years, which is also an academic medical center. There, I was doing more of media relations and promoting the work of Johns Hopkins internationally. So that was about communicating externally and identifying audiences and crafting messaging that would resonate. And that same logic I'm following with the corporate communications arena that I'm now pursuing. So it's just identifying my audiences, what are the channels that they are engaged with, and what are the specific messages that I need to push forward and from whom so they can pay attention. Because in the academic medical world, there are, yes, you have your physicians, but also you have your researchers, the students. So they are in very particular places on their careers. And they, yes, like a general view of what's happening, but also need very specific information and respond to very specific needs. So that's what I'm doing right now in my day-to-day.
And I definitely want to talk about the experience at Johns Hopkins because right now, if in the past 6, 7, 8 months, if somebody didn't really have heard about Johns Hopkins, right now it became like the source of information for everything having to do with the pandemic. It became like our day to day. So I really want to talk. I'm very curious to talk about that. But let's start from a little bit at the beginning in terms of why did you decide to pursue a career in communications?
It has to do with asking questions. When I was a little girl, I would ask questions all the time. And it's a big part of my personality, trying to figure out the world around me and being curious and being driven to people and places that have really nothing to do with me, but I'm just curious to learn about others. When I was about to apply to college, I knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, but I was interested in those things, but it wasn't something that I wanted to pursue myself. So I saw journalism as a good career to have a broad overview of the world, and just being able to ask questions and being exposed to people and situations that really have little to do with me sometimes.
What can you say in general for the person who's listening who may not know what their day to day looks like for a journalist?
So that experience is new every day, which I appreciated. I don't necessarily like routines. When I was in radio in Puerto Rico, my days started really early because it was a morning show. So it was different living the really early morning shift, and some of the radio personalities were on their pajamas and just like very casual, like we're working now in the pandemic. But that was like a fun experience to have because I did not imagine the workplace being like that.
Yes, definitely.
And then when I started in print, I learned to live the night shift because days start at 10, at 11, and then you work until 6, 7, 8, or whatever time you get out of it. One of the things that I really appreciated about being a journalist is that every city that I moved to in that role, I was able to learn the city really quickly and, identify the different communities and the people and really get acquainted with the city. When I moved to Baltimore 10 years ago, I moved to do media relations for a nonprofit. It was hard for me to learn Baltimore because I was basically going to my office, doing my work there. It was international work, so I worked with people from other countries, and it really took me a long time to learn the place that I was living in. And I realized that it was because I was not a journalist anymore, and that wasn't part of my day-to-day life.
And when it comes to journalism, it's interesting because it's not just showing up to a kind of an event and just reporting on the event. You have to make like cold calls and reach out to people, and some people who don't want to be reached,
Yes.
basically. So all these stories, how do you approach that? And I think that could be a skill that's applicable to anybody in like in selling or anything else. Like, how do you approach the cold call or just trying to go to a person with the purpose of asking questions or getting information from them?
I'm not an extrovert, so it doesn't come naturally to me to reach out to people. I just stand really in the middle between being an introvert and an extrovert, and I lean a little bit towards the introvert side. I also like to be challenged, so it was a challenge for me to call people up and ask questions. So I would do it. You learn some tricks. You learn to ask if when you pick up the phone, you're like, oh, am I talking with John Smith? And when they say yes, that's your very first piece of information. So it's like, okay, I have the right person. And then the other thing is that you really need to prepare, and you cannot think of the questions on the fly. Before dialing in, you need to know, I need to speak to John Smith and ask these 3 questions. So being prepared is very important because they might hang up or they engage in a very long conversation, and you can lose control really fast. So it's important to come back to your questions. The other thing is that knowing where the people are going to be. Like sometimes I would just sit in the lobby of the commissioner that I needed to interview and be there for hours. And the secretary was like, well, he's not here yet. And I'm like, well, he'll come in or come out of the office. So I'm just going to stay here.
Persistence. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. And people appreciate also the perseverance. I did not take any of the rejection personally. And that's very, very important because you get a lot of no's, no comment, being hung up the phone, things like that. But not taking it personally is your job and it's what you do. And people know that because you're a reporter, that is what you do. So that helped me in the realm of asking questions to people who not necessarily wanted to be interviewed by me. There are other people who really want to be interviewed and have their agenda already and all the messaging. And that is also a problem because you really need to go to the essence of the story, and you need to be careful of not becoming a amplifier of a
Yeah.
particular message. You need to have some critical thinking there. So that's very important also to have your questions prepared ahead of time and taking control back of the interview. So that was my experience being a reporter asking questions. Being on the other side, on the media relations, is different in the way that you train your spokespeople to have talking points and you train them to stick to their messaging, but also you train them to be sensitive to the questions that they are being asked, right? So because it's very important to not appear tone deaf, and especially with academic medicine and talking to physicians and researchers and helping them explain their discoveries to the world, it's very important that they understand that they need to speak to reporters, not as if they were their lab colleagues, but as if they were their cousins or their neighbor who has no idea about what they do at the lab. So that has been also a transition, and I have been able to incorporate that side of being the one who does the interview to train people on how to best approach these opportunities, because it is important to talk to media and have good information out there because it ultimately benefits the public.
Yeah, I really like that in terms of being prepared, having a clear goals of what you want to speak to that person about. And also when you're on the other side, when you're being the person interviewed, having a simple kind of clearer language, because when we get into those technical terms and the communication doesn't really come across and there's no real communication, right? So that's very important. And I do want to know more about when it came to you as a journalist and trying to establish rapport with somebody, or trying to a person who really doesn't want to speak too much, or they just give you like one word answers to things and you really want to dig deeper. How do you approach that of get more details about?
You really need to have the context of what that person has said in the past and what are you really asking them to respond to, and have questions that are very specific to the topic that you want to dig deeper. So no general questions about, oh, how are you doing today? I mean, if it's a tough interview, you need to go with the tough questions first. But I feel that people really open up and warm up to you if you start just having a conversation. You don't have to be disingenuous and talk to them as if you were your best friend. Just being genuinely interested in them as a person. So I did a lot of reading, anything that I could take from their bios that was something that they liked or enjoy, if they had won an award, if we had lived in a similar place, or if we had gone to the same school, or if we lived in the same city at some point. Just having those connectors was really important for people to open up and see you as a human, and also explaining, this is my job, this is what I have to do, and I know that your job is so and so. So it's just a matter of treading lightly and being genuinely interested in what they have to say. It's important that you don't come across as you having an agenda, but from a place of true curiosity and being also available to listen. Because yes, I'm a preguntona, like I ask many questions.
Ask many questions, yeah.
Yeah, I ask many questions
Curious person.
naturally. Yeah. But the flip side of that is that I really need to be available to listen, and also to listen to information that might contradict my own perception and my own research. So taking information at face value and then doing some critical thinking on it.
Now I want to talk a little bit about your experience when you started with John Hopkins. How was the environment over in John Hopkins once the pandemic hit and providing a clear messages to folks? I just want you to get a glimpse of how it was day to day over there when you were working during this time.
When I started at Johns Hopkins, they recruited me to for a position that had not been part of their profile before. They wanted someone to do media relations for the Middle East and China. I was up to the challenge. I do not speak Arabic. I do not speak Chinese, but I'm a curious person. I ask a lot of questions. I'm a good listener. So they trust that I could figure it out. And I did. I created strategies for those regions, visited the regions. One of the things that I identified was the audience, like who specifically in the Middle East we need to reach and what are the topics that they are interested in. So I created those relationships over the years. And once the pandemic hit, I had established relationships in those areas of the world. And it was interesting because the pandemic started in China. So I was really busy in January, February, March, because the reporters and the people that I would work with on a daily basis were experiencing the pandemic like really early on. So for me, it was just months and months of dealing with COVID. Then when the pandemic hit the US, we had to shift our work schedules and our portfolios because there was just too many inquiries coming in all the time. So it was a matter of establishing processes, training our faculty, and we have a lot of experts, but not all of them are used to talk to the media. So you had to get them comfortable within, days and sometimes within hours, because it was important to get right information out there. So that was really, really intense. But asking questions also to the reporters, like specifically, what do you need to know? Because they were like, oh, I want to know about the pandemic. And I'm like, what specifically about the pandemic you need? Because we have experts looking at this from every angle imaginable. So I need to make sure that I connect you with the right person. And once I identify that right person, it's like, what is happening in your field of work and what is the information that you can provide at this point? So just keeping track on how everything is evolving was very important. And it was like being stuck to the news 24/7 and all 7 days of the week. But it was really, really fulfilling to be in this side of the story, right? That you are providing good information to people who really need it and trying to inform the public.
And how to deal particularly with that. It's a serious situation. We know people, there were a lot of rumors and people immediately get alarmed. So how do you approach that and try to provide the right information and making sure that, the right facts really got out there for people and not just the alarming situation?
So the hospital in February, even before the pandemic hit the US, they established an incident command center. So that means that leaders from the institution are literally in the same space talking all day long about the situation, the response, and communications was a part of the incident command center. So we were able to listen in, and because we were the ones tracking the daily news, we knew what information needed to go out there and what people were asking about and were talking about. We had a very strict protocol to provide information, especially online, because there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. So we would interview the expert, write the piece, and then three experts had to agree on the content of the piece. And we would regularly update the pieces as new information was coming in, because it was a really huge responsibility to just to have the symptoms right. And the symptoms at the beginning, it was like, well, if you have a fever and a cough, and then, loss of sense of smell and taste. And then there were back pain, and then there were other gastrointestinal symptoms. So we needed to continuously update those materials to make sure that we were providing the right information.
You're a communications professional, but some people who are listening to us may not be. We do need to implement it on our day-to-day at work in different shapes. And what key advice would you give to somebody who is on a day-to-day, like in a technical skill, like they could implement now for communications or just asking questions?
I think that the most important thing is not to be afraid of asking questions. In this day and age, there's so much information out there that people think that they should know it because they have access to the information. And also they feel a little bit embarrassed about asking questions because they don't want to be perceived as less intelligent than what they really are. So that is a big hurdle to overcome. I really have no ego in that sense. I start with very simple questions because as a communicator, you really need to understand the subject in order to explain it to other people. In my current position, I am writing for the dean, and I am writing for people who have PhDs, are surgeons, have all this knowledge that I don't have. So we have to have very basic conversations sometimes, and I can't be afraid to ask the basic questions because I really need to make sure that I understand the subject in order to write in their voice or in order to write a message from them that will resonate with a particular audience. So I think that is one of the biggest hurdles. And I've seen how some people are asked to communicate something and they don't understand really what that is. And then the communication is bad. So, and things get lost in translation and it's not effective. So the first thing and the key is to not be afraid of asking questions. And second is listening with the purpose of understanding. And if you don't understand, ask follow-up questions, but listening with the purpose of getting knowledge and being open to change your preconceptions on a particular subject.
This is significant and great advice for anyone in any field. So I truly appreciate your time, Alsy, in the podcast and giving us all this great advice. Thank you for being on the show. This has been truly a great experience. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. If you have learned something today, share this episode with others. To find out about new episodes and skills to learn from, subscribe via your favorite podcast platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. For more resources, visit our website, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.